大家好，欢迎收看《旁观华尔街视角》。今天呢，我们就继续上个星期开始为大家介绍的 Blair Sheppard 教授的新书《人类的4大危机要在10年当中解决》。那么今天我们继续讨论的是以下几个问题：首先是技术上的应用，怎么样应用才能够不伤害人类？其次呢，就是什么样的人现在最适合做领导人类前进的领袖？那么接下来我们要讨论的呢，就是有关移民的问题，如何解决移民、经济全球化，同时又保护个体国家的利益。今天内容还是很多，所以我们马上开始。
COVID-19 is not all bad. There's some good come out of it. For instance, remote working, save energy, save the air, reduce pollution. So a lot of things need to be totally reconsidered. Do you think that will cause a lot of changes? And so the social priority will be changed too?
Yeah, first is I do think that all terrible things usually have a silver lining. There's fortunately a silver lining here, right? And I think the silver lining is that the world has woken up to the challenges more. We're more aware of them. And I think we've actually taught ourselves we can do things fast, and we're learning to use technology as an answer, right? So to your point, technology is the solution on one condition, right? Which is that we have technology savvy humanists. And here's what I mean. One of the crises we talk about is that technology, because it's everywhere, can cause really serious harms if we don't think about those harms. So we need computer engineers who also understand psychology, sociology, and political science, right? We need political scientists and sociologists and psychologists who are also technically capable. And so we have to put things that seem at odds with each other. There are very few people who take electrical engineering and psychology in the same degree. We need more of them, right? And if we can get that, if we can get people who really understand and love humanity and really understand and love technology in the same leader, then they can bring us out of this. If we just have people who understand technology, it won't work because they'll create all these side effects they're never meant to have. Right? We never, so I'll give you an example that's really striking. The part of the human brain that does execution, right, that the short-term memory and attention span is getting worse because of mobile telephones. I'm sure the people who created mobile telephones did not mean to make us dumber, right? And so the issue is we need people who think about how do you do it in a way that actually doesn't have that unintended consequence, right? It requires a more sophisticated technologist.
The leadership. I don't like to see U.S. China had just fighting become enemies, but look like the way they are heading to that direction.
There is no reason in the world that we need a new Cold War. There isn't. I was a competitive swimmer in college, and the person I competed with was also my best friend. Right, and it turned out I needed them because they made me better. Right? If there was no one in the lane beside me I had to swim and try to beat, I wouldn't have worked as hard. I wouldn't have gotten as good. I wouldn't have been as good. And so I need my competitor to be better. China needs the U.S. as a competitor for China to actually thrive and be dynamic. The U.S. needs China. A friendly competition is actually what makes the world great. Right? It doesn't have to become Cold War. Right. And there are very different views of what a political economy should look like. I think the world would be pretty boring if we only had one global view. All right. So in part, we need systems that aren't the same, competing with each other, but respecting one another at the same time. Okay. So that's the first part of my answer to your question about it isn't inevitable and actually it shouldn't be. Then the second piece I think is we essentially have leaders who were trained for the world I was describing we're coming from. We need to help leaders become the leaders we need. And the important point is they have to be kind of leaders who can reconcile paradox. And they've got to be really, really, really political, really good at bringing divergent people together and forming coalitions, but massive integrity. Now ask yourself how many people you think are politicians who have high integrity, right? How many people of high integrity are politicians? Well, we actually need both in the people who lead us, right? And another example is we need people who deeply respect tradition, but actually understand innovation is really important. So in some ways, one of the really interesting things about Chinese leadership broadly is the rediscovery of Confucius. That's a deep respect for tradition, Chinese tradition, but actually use it as a way to bring us into the 21st century rather than drag us back to the 12th century, 10th century, 9th century, right? And so we need people who love the U.S. origins and its constitution and its beginnings, but know we need a different country than the one we came from, right? And that's a tough thing for leaders, by the way, but we should expect it of them.
Immigration is kind of a globalization because labor flow,
Yes.
but you can't stop immigration. But how can you protect the local economy to make it more priority? Meanwhile, welcome immigration.
But I think actually what you need is for communities to embrace the people who join the community and the people who join the community to embrace the community. Right? And so actually true local first really works with immigration. So if an immigrant comes, because it turns out in every city, every town, every village, there's something that needs to get done that people aren't doing. The immigrant's going to do that, right? They have historically done it. They come and actually, they're willing to do the roofing. They're willing to start a business that wasn't started. They're willing to do something pretty hard that other people aren't willing to do, or they see it because they see it fresh. So the issue is that you want the person who comes to a town, a village, a city, a state, or a province to actually adopt that as their home and love it and care for it. And you want the people in that place to adopt them and say, you're part of the solution. Historically, the U.S. thrived locally because of immigrants. There was no competition between the two, right? Now, when you think about it at a national level and you think about the potential loss, yes, it can feel in conflict, but even there, every country has a set of things it needs done that aren't being done. Immigrants tend to find those things and do them for their country. That's the history of the world. And to your point, there are going to be places in the world that are really desperately badly off, and people will need to leave to go somewhere else to be successful. And I think it will be impossible to close our borders, really. I just don't know how you can. Just think about if in Africa, there's 28 countries with a median age under 20. Total population of those countries is 885 million, which means there's 500 million kids needing an education, a job in the next decade. If that doesn't happen, they will go to Europe, right? And so it turns out the only way to solve an immigration problem is to help the domestic economy people are in to be successful, which means create thriving local communities in Nigeria, Zambia, Ghana, right? And if you don't, you better be ready to accept them in your borders because they're coming, right? People will go where there's hope. They always will.
Before you start to help other country, you still need to have your local economy get better.
Yes, charity starts at home, right? There's an old phrase where I was growing up in Canada that charity starts at home, right? Which is that you can't help other people if you haven't helped yourself. So on an airplane, they tell you, put the mask on yourself, then put it on your kid, right? If you're drowning, recover first and then save someone else, right? It doesn't help you to bring someone else when you're drowning. So it's clearly true that you have to help yourself locally, but that's not inconsistent with immigration, right? It is true that if I'm poor, it's hard for me to help you, and so I have to help myself first. But if you think about China and the US, we're talking about two pretty rich countries, right? It's not like we're poor, right? There are places that are poor, there are people that are poor, but the countries are pretty wealthy. So we have a lot of resource to help. We're not lacking resource at all.
谢谢您的收看，我们下次再见。